One of my favorite things about thrifting is that some of the best home decor pieces don't start out looking like something you'd bring home. And today I'm sharing a few of my latest thrift store finds inspired by timeless styles of stores like Pottery Barn, Magnolia, McGee Co, and Ballard Designs. But more importantly, I'll show you what caught my eye, why I brought each piece home, and how a few simple changes can give it a completely different look. Because creating a home you love isn't about finding the perfect piece, it's about learning to recognize the right one. Now grab your coffee, get comfy, and let's dive in. So one of my favorite things to thrift are old silverware boxes. I've redone several over the years because they're such versatile pieces. One became storage for my sunglasses because the velvet lining made it the perfect spot to keep them from getting scratched up. Another one I used to hide our alarm system, and I'll link that project in the description box. So when I spotted this one at the thrift store for 50% off, I knew I wanted to bring it home and give it another life. This time I'm turning it into a little storage station for our family room. I wanted a place to corral all those little things that seem to end up scattered around, like remotes, lighters, coasters, tapered candles, and those little LED votives I like to keep handy. Inspiration for this makeover came from a couple of beautiful wood storage boxes I found at Pottery Barn. I love the rich wood tones, the simple design, and how they feel like pieces that would never go out of style. And when I looked at this old silverware box, I noticed it already had some of the same details, especially the little knobs on the front. With the right finish, I thought it could have a richer look like the inspiration. The first thing I wanted to do was remove the existing finish because this gray-green color was just looking tired and old. Normally, I would take a piece like this outside and sand it down, but with temperatures around 100 degrees here, I was looking for another option. So I decided to try something a little unconventional, 100% acetone. Yep, acetone. I tested it on the back first to make sure it would work, and I was surprised how well it started breaking down the finish. For the top, I carefully poured the acetone over the surface and let it sit for a few seconds before scraping away the old finish. And then I started removing the gray coating. I could not believe the wood hiding underneath. That's one of my favorite parts about working with thrifted furniture and decor. Sometimes there's something beautiful underneath that first layer and you didn't know what you had until you started looking. And don't worry about my surface. Underneath the drop cloth, I put a plastic liner to protect my table. Now the front, back, and sides of the piece were easier to remove the finish with just cotton balls and pads. The finish wasn't as heavy as the top, so I didn't find the need to pour on the acetone. Once everything was stripped, I needed to clean up the inside. These boxes usually have that velvet lining, which I love, but after years of sitting around, they can collect quite a bit of dust. So I used a lint roller to pick up everything and used some of the sticky paper to get the corners before giving the inside a spray of disinfectant. Then it was time to bring out one of my favorite finishes, dark wax. I applied it all over, letting it settle in to the wood grain to bring out all those beautiful details. After letting it sit for a couple of hours, I came back with a soft cloth to buff everything out, which really finishes off the piece when you're using wax. So this silverware box went from something that looked dated and forgotten to a piece that feels like it belongs right alongside those designer-inspired storage boxes. Now it has a place in our family room to keep all those little everyday items organized, and it pairs beautifully with my other pieces. So the other day when I was at the thrift store, I came across this crystal bowl for $2. I couldn't resist it because of the shape. There are so many things you could do with a piece like this, and I wanted to see how many different ways I could use it around my home. It did have a few scuffs and needed a good cleaning, but with some Dawn power wash, it cleaned right up and was ready for styling. The first thing I tried was flowers. There's something about a crystal bowl that makes even a simple arrangement feel a little more elegant. The way it catches the light adds interest without needing anything complicated. Then I wanted to try something a little more practical, so I filled it with candy. I think pulling a Starlight Mint from a crystal bowl makes it feel a little bit more special. Next, I tried a chunky pillar candle. The combination of glass and candlelight always makes the space feel warmer and more inviting. But I think my favorite use for the bowl was with a floating candle. The way the flame and the water reflect through the crystal creates such a pretty glow. Then there are the water-activated LED tea lights that Dollar Tree carries. You simply add them to water and they turn on and float. They would be so fun to add to a bubble bath too. Then I wanted to see how this piece would work in a more functional way. I added some crystal vase filler to the bottom and used it as a makeup brush holder, and I think it looks gorgeous sitting on my bathroom counter. It turns an everyday item into something that feels a little more glamorous. And finally, I tried it as a tissue holder. It's the perfect shape and I think it's a little unexpected. So for $2, this crystal bowl gives me so many options. So tell me, which one was your favorite and how would you style it? So I've admired the look of hanging baskets from places like McGee Co and Williams-Sonoma for a while now. There's something about adding texture to a wall. So when I spotted this one at Goodwill for $3.99, I knew I had to bring it home. Before I do anything with thrifted baskets, I always give them a good cleaning. I like to dunk them a few times in warm soapy water with a little disinfectant, then let them dry overnight. Once it was clean and completely dry, it was time to change the color. The basket itself was great, but the lighter finish didn't really work with the other pieces in my home. I had this Java chalk paint in my stash that was starting to get a bit thick, so I added some water to thin it out, which actually made it much easier to work into all the nooks and crannies of the basket. Now, if you find a basket that has more of an orange undertone, you may want to neutralize it first with a taupe color or even a coat of white primer before your final finish. This way the orange won't come through. Now, I always get lost in thought when painting, so I started thinking about all the different ways you could use a basket like this. Of course, it would be beautiful with flowers, but I could also see it in an entryway with mail, hanging on a door with seasonal stems instead of a wreath, or in a kitchen holding a few cookbooks. Now I'm going to use it in my guest bathroom behind the door. At first I tucked in a few extra towels, but then I switched them out for a few toiletries instead. It's a simple way to make guests feel welcome, and the basket keeps everything organized without taking up any counter space. What started out as a $3.99 thrift store find now feels right at home in the space. Sometimes all it takes is finding the right piece and giving it a finish that works with the rest of your home. Sometimes when I'm thrifting, I find a piece that makes me stop because it reminds me of something I've seen somewhere much more expensive, and that's exactly what happened with this brass-looking bowl. I found it at the thrift store on sale for $1.50, and the first thing I noticed was the shape. It reminded me of several designer pieces I've seen from places like Magnolia, Ballard Designs, and Lulu in Georgia. There's something about a gold bowl that feels classic. It can be styled so many different ways and work with so many different decorating styles. When I brought it home, I noticed that there were some green remnants inside, which made me think it had probably been used for a floral arrangement. But a little soap and water cleaned it right up. I thought about adding wooden rings around the outside to mimic the look of the one from Lulu in Georgia, but in the end, I decided to keep this one simple. I wanted to work with what I already had and let the shape of the bowl be the star. This bowl needed to look like the designer ones was to finish the inside to match the outside. So I pulled out some metallic acrylic craft paint that looked pretty close to the outside color and gave it a few coats. Color blended in seamlessly and made the piece look more like the inspiration. Right now, I'm using it on my dining room table filled with faux pears, but I'm already thinking ahead to the holidays. Maybe some ornaments, but it could even work as a serving piece for bread as long as it's lined with a towel. Or I could see it styled with a small topiary for a completely different look. For $1.50, this thrift store find gives me so many options and resembles those high-end pieces. So one thing I never skip when I'm thrifting is the seasonal section. A lot of people walk right past those aisles because they're looking for pieces they can use immediately, but I have found some amazing treasures there. Sometimes it's not about what the item was made for, it's about looking at the details and seeing what else could become. And that's exactly what happened with these Halloween skeleton frames. I found them at Goodwill for $2.99, and the frames caught my attention right away. The quality was beautiful, and I loved the gold finish and the way the pictures hung from the chains. It had a much more elevated feel than I expected from a seasonal piece. I started thinking with a few changes, these could become something I would actually use in my home year-round. The first thing I needed to do was figure out how they were put together. I needed to remove the glass, but I didn't want to damage the frames. So I pulled out my heat gun and started warming the adhesive on the lowest setting. I found that using a lower heat worked much better because it gave me more control. Trying to dismantle the piece using a high heat setting was making the piece too hot. Once the adhesive started loosening, I used a butter knife to carefully work around the edges and lift the glass away from each frame. It took a little patience, but it wasn't difficult, and I'm saving the pieces, for later because you never know when they could become a part of another project. Next, I needed to update the chains. The black finish didn't really work with the gold frames, so I reached for some rub and buff in a gold tone and added a little color to help everything blend together. Then it was time to find something to fill the frames. I had this book from Dollar Tree in my stash that had the most beautiful feminine sketches inside. And since these are going in my bathroom on a narrow wall, I chose images with soft blues, greens, and pinks to work with the colors already in the room. I decided to leave some of the words visible on the pages because I loved the charm they added. It made the artwork feel a little more collected and unique. Once I found the images I wanted, I traced the openings and then the glass, cut everything to size, and attached them with tape. I didn't want to make anything permanent because I like having options to change things later. After adding the chains back on, they were ready to hang. Once they were on the wall, I felt like the top needed a little something extra. So I added this small bow. It helped finish off the look, which also covered the nail. I love how these turned out, and by looking past the original purpose, they became everyday frames that work great in my bathroom. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next Saturday.